if you know anything about PEO, my wife is in the same chapter that Eunice is, and I guess you're my sister via that. And my wife is also the photographer for the series of books. So anyway, I thank you so much. I thought you all would have learned your lesson about 6 years ago when you had me come the first time, but thank you for having me come back this time. It was about 4 years ago when I read an article in the newspaper that Oregon had more ghost towns than any other state. And honestly, I was excited for about 10 seconds. My wife and I probably know the state as well as anyone, and I have a definition of ghost town here, and when I read that, I thought, no, we don't have the most. We can't have the most. And we've been to Montana, we've been to Colorado, we've been to Idaho and Nevada, and they have a lot more ghost towns than we do. Well, it wasn't until I started doing research when I discovered the definition of ghost town. And I'm going to share that with you as a preface to where we're going, and then I'm going to show pictures and talk about the ghost towns in the state of Oregon. But a ghost town can be any community that has suffered a significant loss of population. Now, what does that mean? Holy cow. Valsetz, by definition, is a ghost town. And if you've been to Valsetz lately, there's nothing there. There is one concrete step, I believe. Shaniko is a ghost town, even though there's 110 people that might argue with me. But it is by definition. So what I want to do is begin the talk with the boring part, I think. It's defining what a ghost town is. And then I'm going to share with you what I want to do, and that's redefine the terminology. And mine is very simple, easy, hopefully, to follow. And this first one is somewhat complex, so I'm going to have you play along with me. And with your left hand, hold up 8 fingers, and with your right hand, hold up 8 fingers. Because there are 8 parts on the left and 8 parts on the right. There are 8 letters that define the style or the caliber of ghost town, and then there are 8 numbers that follow to further define the letter. And you'll see as I go through here, if I can figure this out. There we go. So, an A is a barren site. So this is Valsetz. Nothing there today. That's a ghost town. B, you can read, rubble, roofless buildings is different than C, which is what most of us think is a ghost town. Standing, abandoned buildings. The D, small number of people. Remember the significant loss? Yes. E, now figure this one out. E, a busy historic district. Significant loss of, anyway. F, if it doesn't fit A, B, C, D, E, it fits F. G, the town was absorbed by another, and I have a perfect example of that is in the Dalles. And we'll show you pictures of the one that has been enveloped by the community. And then H is a semi or near ghost town with no or few original buildings, such as Fort Rock, where the buildings have been brought on site to the ghost town. All right, now with those 8 fingers on the left, let's match with a number. And so a mining town would be a 1. Agricultural 2. Valsetz would be an A3. Nobody's there, timber town. Shipping stage, religious, you get the idea. So match a letter with a number. Mine is a 1 through 5. A 1 is a true ghost town. It's what you and I think. Nobody lives there. There's abandoned buildings. No people. But I'm even trying to be more strict, more stringent. One of the empty buildings has to be a schoolhouse, a church, a post office, or a general store. or it doesn't count to me as a true one ghost town. So a 2, kind of a small population, Shaniko would qualify here. Granite would qualify. We're going to show you some pictures of those places. 3 is the collection of buildings such as we talked about Fort Rock. 4, roofless buildings. Cross Hollows, and we'll show you some pictures of Cross Hollows in a moment. It's 2 miles from Shaniko. Most people don't know about it or haven't been there, and I'll tell you the story as we get to it between now and 11:55. And then 5 is historically significant location, but it's not a ghost town. And my last book has 351 ghost towns, I believe. 285 are significant historically, but to me do not meet my stringent requirement of 1, 2, 3, or 4. So with that, let's take a tour of some ghost towns in Oregon. And in the books, I do the writing and the research. My wife, Diane, takes all the pictures. So all of these are my wife's. And she gets more credit for her work than I do, because it's actually better. So, by region, so till whatever time the break is, we'll break them apart by region. So, in the North Central, let's talk about Hardman. Right on the main highway. You can read here as well. It used to be 2 towns. I'm not making this up. It used to be 2 communities of Yellow Dog and Raw Dog. One brother lived in Yellow Dog, and he had the general store. The other brother lived in Red Dog, and he ran the post office. Well, you already guess what happened. The 2 boys got in a spitting match. And it got so bad, if you lived in Raw Dog, you couldn't go to Yellow Dog to get your groceries. And if you lived in Yellow Dog, you couldn't go to Raw Dog to mail your letters. Until the boys made up. And they did, all was well, and renamed the town Hardman. We don't realize how important yellow pine was as a source of revenue and work in eastern Oregon. And huge pine forests. And most of that's gone, but Hardman made its living via the yellow pine. And if you go to Hardman today, if we can get this to advance, there we go. Boy. Okay. It wasn't working either. Yeah, I was banging everything. Okay. Please forgive me. Anyway, here's what you're going to see today if you go to Hardman. And I always start out with Hardman because, notice the sign, by the way, Yellow Dog and Raw Dog? Unless you knew the story, you would have no idea why that's on the wall. But most communities, like Hardman, the post office was part of the general store. I can try. I know it's better, but it's really hard for me to do this. Anyway, the store at one time had the post office in it. And the lean-to the left is the additional building that was added to the store. And you're going to see this frequently on the Ghost Town tour today. This one is about 75 miles just off of Highway 97 straight down in Central Oregon. Typical of the homes you're going to see in the town of Hardman. This is the old Mercantile. Cecil is a very important community, or it was for the pioneers. They really don't know how many pioneers came across the Oregon Trail. Estimates go from 200,000, 450,000. Many of them had to stop here because this was a source of water in the middle of Central Oregon. 1867, you can read here, the fellow that formed the town had wagon troubles, could go no further, nor wanted to go any further, and said, I'm stopping here. So this community goes way, way back. There is a 1902 school, 03 church, or excuse me, store. The ranch is still there. If you walk out into the field, which I will show you a picture of the store, you can still see the well where the pioneers en route to Oregon drank their water. Now I have this to show you. This is how you are greeted when you come into the small community. It's also how they say goodbye to you, and they're about 50 yards apart. This is modernized. If you notice the wheels, True Shepherd's wagons would have the wooden spokes, not this one. So this is kind of interesting to see the conveniences of the modern times. This is the 1903 store that still stands. My wife is taking the picture from the field in front of it, and directly behind her would be the well that estimates of 250,000 people drank from. It's amazing to me. There really is a community called Clem. It's near Condon. Whoops, too far. All right. It was named for a German settler. It was a stagecoach stop, and the stagecoach stop is still there. It's now a private residence. The old schoolhouse still stands, goes back to 1884, and I have a picture of that for you. Tough people to make a living. Look at the background. Not a tree. Rolling wheat, wheat, and wheat. Mayville. Again, not too far from Condon. Originally called Clyde. Postal Service changed the name, and they changed it to the month that was officially changed to Mayville. The general store still stands. Up top the general store is the IOOF hall. There is a tombstone in the cemetery, and we always go to cemeteries. There's much history to be found. And see if I get the same reaction from you that I get at most talks. I memorized the epitaph on his grave. And it says, yes, poorly born, poorly lived, and poorly died. And no one cried. Same reaction. But I just find that what a terrible life that person must have had, or an extreme sense of humor if it was the opposite. But anyway, here's what you'll see today. My wife is standing in the middle of the highway taking that picture. General store below and the IOOF. It's amazing. Masonic lodges, IOOF, WOWs flourished turn of the 20th century. Or 20th. Half a dozen buildings like this. There is a farmhouse with about 7 outbuildings right on the main highway. It's just amazing. And again, look at the wheat and the ruggedness of the terrain here. Here's the house on Main Street. 7 outbuildings. Whoops, too many. There. Kent goes back to the 1860s. Kind of the whole Main Street is abandoned. When Highway 97 came through, town, actually the few buildings or the few businesses that remain followed the highway. And here's what you'll see on the former downtown strip. Love the false front. Real typical again, 1890s, 1910. And here's a root cellar. My wife again is standing in Highway 97 taking this picture. Gateway near Madras. It was going to be the gateway to prosperity. Well, it didn't quite make it. A couple things still stand. The old train station's still there. The Vibert store is there. And in fact, there's the store. And literally right across the street from the store is the train station. Not far from Dufur. And it's not what you can do for Dufur, it's what Dufur can do for you. And they tell you that if you go there. This small community is about 20 miles out. General store still stands, the schoolhouse still stands. There is a bank vault in the middle of a field. Bank vaults were typically made of wood, or excuse me, not made of wood, made of rock or concrete or something. This bank vault stands in the middle of a wheat field. And here is the old store. The school, very well kept. The community keeps this up, and they still have community gatherings here. That's what's left of the bank. Northeast Oregon, someone talked to me before we started here and said, aren't most of the ghost towns in Northeast? Ghost towns of the number one variety, yes. But ghost towns by the new definition, no. But so the Northeast will have more of the, I call the typical ghost town, the 1 and the 2. So this is near halfway. And again, here's the yellow pine influence in Eastern Oregon. Goes back to the 1870s. The old store's still there. The school is there and half of the gym. Let's see. There were 2 of those stolen. Oregon, if maybe you've been to Bodie, California, Virginia City, Montana, Silver City, Idaho, things were left in those towns. They're on display for people to see today. Oregon has done a super good job of cleaning out every ghost town. Every one that we've been to, which probably is in my book of 350 has been close to 200, there's nothing left worth taking. The buildings stand, even some of the wood from the buildings is being removed. But here's an example again, that second gas tank, the old pump kind, is gone. Someone hauled it off in the middle of the night. Oops. Here's the old home right across the street from the store. Here's half of the gym. The rest was removed. Austin is not a typical gold rush community. I call Austin the 8-to-5ers. Austin took care of miners. They did dimension lumber for the hard rock mines. They took care of supplies. They got horses. There were 3 livery stables here. They aided the miners but did no mining themselves. Post office back to 88. The hotel ran until the Depression. If you drive to Austin today, it's about a mile off of the highway, and you come through a cul-de-sac, and along this cul-de-sac are 7 homes, and that's what remains of the town. And you tour the cul-de-sac and you drive back out. And here's typical, of, this is the end of the cul-de-sac. All are white, even today. This is one of the homes as you go down the mile lane. And another. Granite. Granite's a 2, almost a 1. There are 10 residents there. Most of those are summertime, and the population does grow. There was an RV park there for people that want to pan. A lot of people will pan for gold in the tailings left over from the dredges, and there was a dredge in the Granite area. The Chinese Americans did very well in the tailings because the bigger chunks were found in the dredges, and they didn't even mess with the smaller flakes. So it goes back to 1862, and they are still mining today. Post office till 857. It's hard to imagine when you go there, over 5,000 miners called this home for look how many years. The general store is still there. Probably 15, 20 buildings still stand. Of course, the dance hall. But here's what you'll see if you go to, that's the general store. There are about 6, 7 blocks north and 6 or 7 blocks east and west that you can drive through that all have buildings on them. There's the old church. Typical miner's home. Not unlike other ghost towns, there was a brothel, and it was Rose that ran the brothel in Granite. And you need to go see her gravesite because she died in a fire. But before she died, she rescued 4 little boys that lived in the home that caught fire. Hamilton, near the John Day fossil beds. And if you know about the fossil beds, there's actually 3 distinct and unique in different areas. This is across from the Painted Hills portion. Hamilton was settled in 74 by the man named Hamilton. He's buried in the 1892 cemetery. When I do school talks to kids, it's hard for them to understand how grocers or how storemen or clerks worked 100 plus years ago. You didn't go in and pull things off of shelves. Things were pulled off for you. You handed the list to the proprietor, and he or she would fill your order based on what you had written down. And you just waited your turn. No shopping carts. You just had to wait your turn. Anyway, this is the general store. My wife Diane is taking the picture from the highway. And that is the house that Hamilton lived in the community of Hamilton. I just really am intrigued by the community of Fox. It's hard to imagine Red Fox running everywhere, but they did. That's how it was named. Post office literally just closed, 14 years ago. We have a picture of that for you coming up. There's a handful of residences. The schoolhouse is still there. The church is still there. General store. Church with the outhouse. Swanky churches had 2 outhouses. And swanky schools had 2 outhouses. Most had 1. And we're going to see some pictures the second half of schoolhouses with diamond windows. And I want to tell you the importance of a diamond window second half. Fox School goes back to 18. Here is this thing again.
Where was it?
This is against northeast of Burns, and then over some. If you look inside here, you can see the mailboxes that are still there. 1901 church, look behind is the outhouse. And there is the school. Again, pretty rugged area. No, yeah, I'll go back. Oops. No windows in the front. There's the livery stable that still stands. There are a couple people that still live there. Southwest. This is near Oregon Caves. And it was a gold rush. Oregon had two gold rushes. We had a gold rush in the northeast and a gold rush in the southwest, and both occurred about the same time, hitting their peaks in the 1860s. Holland was no different. It was settled though in 1890. General store still stands. 2 cemeteries, 1 building is all that remains. And that's the store. I always try to make a purchase at these places because they're going to be going out of business, and with them will go a lot of history, because it takes a special person to make a living in a remote place like Holland. Kirbyville was even talked about as being the state capital because there were so many miners in the 1850s. I guess fortunately for the state, the gold played out quickly. But one of the earlier post offices in the state, actually even before we were a state, county seat in 57, the 98 schoolhouse, we have a picture of that for you. Here's an example of the Masonic Lodge and its importance. And there's the schoolhouse, 1898. Again, as a school teacher, it's hard to imagine teaching in a facility like that. And they sure as heck didn't have these things, computers. Here's the Masonic Lodge. And my wife is standing in the middle of the road. She's going to turn around now and take the picture of the IOOF. This town was big enough to have both of these organizations. So here's the Masons, and here's the Oddfellows. We don't think much about Scottsburg as being a ghost town, but there are several empty buildings, and the oldest store that I know of in the state of Oregon is located here, and it's right on the main highway.
38.
Thank you. Yes, Levi Scott, the California Trail, which is pretty much I-5. It was named for him. He was with Applegate, Levi. The head and store goes back to 1851. Post office in 52. One of the 10 oldest in the state. Minnie Fryer home, there are a bunch. It's hard to imagine this statistic, but this hardware store that I will show you outfitted 500 pack animals with things for the miners per day for almost a full year. The impact of gold in Oregon was undeniably significant. So here is the store, 1851. It even shows here, in case you couldn't figure that out. It's a historic place. This is the Minnie Fryer home.
Good restaurant there now.
Ah, there wasn't when I took these pictures. Wow. Here's the new schoolhouse. All right, remote. Remote's one of those communities that was bypassed by the road, by the railroad, and disintegrated. There are 3 buildings that remain, a couple houses, and the store. logging. Yes, it is, by Myrtle Point. Jennings House, general store. Covered bridge was bypassed by the road too. It's now a picnic area. But here's the store. I point out again the addition, which is the post office. So that the town grew to a point where it got its own post office here. If you could see, it would say 98 cents a gallon. So it gives you an idea how many years it's been since that store closed. This is a sandy covered bridge, and you can picnic on it today, but you cannot drive across. Stevens is about 10 miles from Sutherland. Good old Ebenezer, 52. House is still there. You'd have to drive 1 block off of the highway, again into a cul-de-sac, of which there are about 7 buildings that remain from the community. Schoolhouse is in there, the Stevens House, the church, and the women's club. And here is the church today. We were fortunate enough that we were taking the picture, and the person said, "What are y'all doing?" And we got to go inside. And it's used for weddings now. It does not have weekly services. Here is the school. Notice the door's open. It's open in the summers. And here's the Stevens House, for whom the community was named. We don't think of Southeast Oregon as having many ghost towns, but it has several. And one of those is Druzy. And Druzy, when we talked about the highway bypassing, well, the highway bypassed it by 4 miles. The railroad bypassed it by 3 miles. So it's amazing that Druzy is even doing anything today. But it was originally called Gaujai. And the name came because that's how the cowboys used to settle their fights. You get into a fist fight and you just gouge them in the eye and it's over, it's done. No AK-15s or 47s. The store opened in 1883. Post office short behind. The name was changed to Druzy. Druzy was the postmaster's daughter. So that's how it's changed. And postmaster or postmistress had all kinds of power. And many communities were named after the postmaster because they had the power to do that. It's amazing the history of the postal service. Anyway, Catholic Church is just gorgeous. 1910, still stands. They didn't get electricity until 42. They were off grid. Wow. Anyway, here is the church. Gives you an idea how big Druzy was at one time. I just think that the steeple is very beautiful. Bright blue. Okay, this is my only R-rated slide in the show. They are not kidding either. Had we been, well, I said I wasn't going to talk politics today, so I won't. So good. Anyway, Gaujai. If you look up here, you can see Gaujai. And again, unless you know the history, you just wonder how in the heck that name, why is that name on the building? Westfall. 15 miles out of Harper, which is familiar to everybody, I'm sure. It's one of the prettiest drives for me in the entire state of Oregon, by the way. It is all paved, so you leave Harper and you meander, and it's the most beautiful red rock formations that you can imagine. And you end up the end of the road in Westfall. The general store goes back to 89. It's one of the few general stores today that is a residence. Cemetery goes back to 94, town in 95. Here is the general store today. And this is pretty much the end of the road when you get to Westfall. Now, 100 years ago, they had trails out from it. That's it. This is typical of what you'll see from the homes that still stand, if they stand at all, in this community. And I always ask the question, boy, if those walls could talk, what would they say? Can you imagine making a living in the middle of sagebrush like that? Tougher people than I. Imagine I think it's 5,000 or 1,000 even miners living here. Goes back to 1870. This was a gold mining community, and these were what I call the tough guy miners. The softies like me sluice mined or gold panned. Then there was hydraulic mining, and then there were the guys that dug holes in mountains and rock, and that's what these guys were. Tough, tough individuals. 1,000 miners. Forgive me for exaggerating. Yeah. Malheur City always had a problem with water. They would have meetings, and in the meetings they would all agree we have enough water to keep the cemetery green, but not enough to fight fires that come through the town. 3 fires went through Malheur City. Most of the homes are gone. In fact, of the 1,000 that were there, or the one building kind of, sort of, a little bit of remains. And here's what remains of Malheur City. And I'm know darn good and well some kids are going to come and knock that down. But it was there in 2004, it was there in 2014, or 15, so I know it's still standing as of then. But it won't take much for that to go. But look at the grass, how high it is. Imagine if a fire comes, whoosh. They didn't have enough water to fight the fire, but by gosh, they kept that cemetery green. And that's what you'll see at the end of the line in Malheur City today. And there's still enough water to keep it green. Durkee is one of the few places that we were not welcomed. In fact, I had a fellow chase me with a hammer to get me out of his town. He was restoring this house on Main Street, and got down off his ladder, grabbed his hammer, started running. So did I. Name for a pioneer settler goes back to the 1860s, and this is just off of I-84. There's his example of, again, the freeway not doing any good to the community because it dried up once that freeway went through. Mercantile stood till 1890. It was opened in 1890s. The old schoolhouse is still there. Church is still there. In fact, there's the church today. Imagine the size of the community 100 years ago. If you're driving from Durkee to the town of Bridgeport, and I encourage you to do that if you get over there, I will guarantee that you'll see bighorn sheep. The road between Durkee and Bridgeport follows a creek. Lots of gold came out of that creek. The creek runs fast enough that the bighorns cannot hear cars coming around the corners. And there's a picture in the back of one of the books of this probably 200-pound sheep that wouldn't get out of the way of our car and wouldn't let my wife out of the car to get his picture. He was a big boy. But there's also some gold panning exhibitions, and there's a place where you can gold pan as well for a small fee. This is the old tavern. Is it about quarter after when break? Okay. Okay. 1912 school. Neat house. Everything you'll see in my books still stands. There are a couple of exceptions, and I will talk about a couple of those after the break here. I guess I'm supposed to wait for 2 minutes to get to questions. Then we'll take those. So hang on to that thought, my friend. Danner. Now think, Danner. Why does that ring a bell? This is shoes, yeah. This is also where Sacagawea's son is buried. Pomp, Jean-Baptiste Charbonneau, died on the way from the California goldfields to the Montana goldfields at this stagecoach stop, which used to be called Inskip Station. It was part of the old Skinner Toll Road. It goes back to 1863. It's amazing to me. Anyway, here's the graveside. If you go, Native Americans revere him as via his mom. And you're supposed to place something on the gravesite that is of significance to you, but not of great monetary value. Native Americans clean the cemetery once a month. And I'll show you a picture of the gravesite with trinkets on it. So here is, on this side, is his grave. This is the remains of the stagecoach stop, and in front of that fire is where Jean-Baptiste passed. And these are right across the street from one another. And if you notice here, you can't quite see, there's a whiskey bottle, but it's full of a pretty rock, there's a penny, there are different things of that people have placed here on his grave. A peacock roost today. Again, imagine the number of people that must have lived here to keep that store open. Here's things that we took a picture of on his gravesite. I should have put 2 roads diverged into Yellowwood for my book series. Lowen. Notice the asterisk here. It's because postal authorities couldn't read the handwriting of the person that submitted the name for the community. It was supposed to be Lowen with a U, not a W. Goes back to 1887. Road bypassed the community twice. The store was moved to its current location, was bypassed a second time. The store still stands, but there's nothing else left in the community. But it goes back to 1891. Hard to imagine 100 people living there. 1924, gone. And here's what you'll see today. Been a while since that boy's been open. This is the second place they didn't like me. IZ is a ranch, and it's named for an I and a Z brand. The IZ Ranch is thousands and thousands of acres in size. It's huge. We have 2 cars that we take for our trips. One's a Prius, and one is our Highlander. And the Highlander goes places because it's four-wheel drive, and the Prius because we can get there and it's economical. Here's a Ford 150, and there's a Ford 250, and a Ford 350. Well, this guy was driving a Ford 85,000. I cannot even see the window opening. The car was up so high. This voice comes out. I can't even see the fellow. And he says, "Son, what y'all doing here?" I said that too fast because he drawled it on for 5 minutes, I swear. I told him what I was doing. He said, "Son, We don't want you here. And that window went closed. We fooled him. We took pictures anyway. So we're going to see those pictures, and then I'll take your question, my friend. All right, so here's the brand. Cemetery goes back to 1890s. Be careful going to see the cemetery because of rattlesnakes. And I say this, and I put it in the books as well. In the summertime, there are many places you just need to be careful of. And being the heroic husband I was for my wife, I would throw rocks ahead of her walking, so she knew where they were. I can say that because she's not here. The school goes back to 1912. There are about 7 buildings that still stand on what used to be Main Street. Anyway, here is the IZ Community Center. It was large enough to have one of these. Just amazing to me. And here's the schoolhouse. And behind that was the school marm's house. And it still stands. This is the Little Ranch headquarters. This is where that Ford 87,000 came from when it saw me coming through his town. And the original ranch house is in the middle of that someplace. But there was no way I was going to get a picture of that. No way at all. So I think it's time for the break, but questions? Yes.
I was just curious about Durkee. That White House there, I know.
Why don't we use a mic here?
I was just curious about Durkee. That White House there, is that the one that was being worked on?
No. The one that was being, just picking up it all, the one that was being worked on was more on Main Street. The one we showed you a picture of is as you come in off of the freeway just before you get to the downtown.
Okay. I was just curious because I know the guy that owns that White House.
Oh, okay.
And if it's a short, bald-headed guy, that was him.
Okay. Well, this guy had a hat on, and all I could see was his hammer.
One other quick question: Have you ever gained access to Antone? You know where I'm talking about?
I do not.
The Antone Ranch out there east of Mitchell.
No, I have heard about it. I think I have it in my compendium book, but I don't have it because a lot of the places I couldn't. This is not. There we go. Is not easily accessed, or you have to have permission. So I talk about them, but I don't have other information other that I could research.
I just wonder because they're not friendly.
No. Other questions before we break?
This is Jim. Just a addendum here. I think it's Danner where Charbonneau is buried. John Skinner has written a book. He lives here in Salem about the Skinner Trail and about the burial of Charbonneau. And his story goes on that the highway department was going to bulldoze that area, and his mother stood there with a shotgun and stopped it.
Good for her.
But it's a great book.
This is Roger. Just a comment. Hardman happens to be in Morrow County. And Morrow County I'm aware of because about 50 years ago I did a water and sewer study there for the 5 communities, and Hardman was the 6th. And fortunately it didn't have any water and sewer, so I didn't have to do it.
Yeah, Hardman is really a unique community if you get there, because you come over, it's like it's built in a bowl. So you come over the top of the rim, and here's this town. And half of the houses are empty, and the wind blows, and you hear the screen doors clang, clang. All of a sudden, you hear a car start or a dog bark. It's really kind of cool. And you drive out of town, you go over the top of the bowl and out, and boom, on your way. Yep.
I'm Karen Bender, and I'm just asking if you've come across somebody who has a gun that might be an issue for you.
There, found wood. Knock on wood. I have not as of yet. And we have 2 more books coming. And one is called Beyond the Roads Less Traveled. It will be an addendum to the first 7. And that's in the back of our minds now, where it wasn't even 5 years ago. So we are very, very cautious when we go into places. I was teasing about the rattlesnakes. I'm more afraid of what you're talking about than those doggone rattlers.
Hi, my name is Joan. Who came up with the first definition of ghost town that you had with, the 8 and 8, and for what purpose?
Yes, my understanding is that there is a National Ghost Town Association, and it's been clarified in Oregon by the PNP, the Pacific Northwest Photographers, who have taken that definition and made it the one that I shared. But basically it's the same thing, and that's somewhat universal across the United States. I just think mine's simpler, cleaner, and I think most people that I've talked to think of one ghost town is as I have shared. There's nobody lives there. Nobody lives there.
I'm Barbara. What was the reason for the false front? I used to think that was just what movies did, but they all had that false front.
I am asked that enough that I need to find out the answer, but I do not know, and I don't want to say something I don't know about. It's a great question.
Sorry. The general stores that you were talking about all seem to have been very heavily provisioned themselves in order to be able to supply 5,000 miners and 500 horse. How did they do that? Because these places were fairly remote. Even if they were on Stage Cop, you would have to have huge numbers of wagon trucks coming through with goods to supply all of this stuff.
I can't begin to imagine how many wagon trains there were in the state of Oregon. The Conestogas were the big ones, and I don't know if you're aware that the term stogie comes from the cigars that the Conestoga wagon masters drove, and they were the supply wagons. And I just can't imagine, for example, in Scottsburg, how many wagons had to come in with all those provisions to get them out on a daily basis at that level. So, pretty dusty place we lived in at the time.
Yeah, my name is David. I went to school in Colorado, and we used to go up in the mountains and hike and camp. And one time we camped near an old cemetery, and that's all that was left of the town. But it was easy to see what had happened because we looked at the graves, and the graves looked like they were all children. So something had happened that killed all the kids off.
Diphtheria, cholera. There's a couple places in the Roads Less Traveled series where there's one cemetery with 12 names the same, and the dates are all within 3 or 4 days of one another. Yeah, it's pretty. Vernell.
Hey, Steve.
Ask me an easy one.
This has been so fun. Anyway, just to let you know, the Scottsburg community was provisioned by boat. Boats would come up from San Francisco, come up the Umpqua River, and it was quite deep at that time, and now it's not. But ships could come right to Scottsburg, and Scottsburg was even considered as becoming the capital.
I knew that part. I had no idea the boat. It's hard to imagine the Willamette down to Harrisburg. If please go to Harrisburg, even if you don't buy the doggone book, because that was the terminus of the ferry boats and the steamboats on the Willamette. And the park there is a couple 100 yards long, and that was all a dock at one time. And Harrisburg is full of history. So you have to get down, but similar. And boy, there's no way I would even think a steamship could go down there today. Yes, sir.
Hi, this is Lester. You mentioned at one point one of the towns being incorporated. And I'm just wondering, is that a usual thing or unusual? And when they come down to 10 or 15 people, are they still an incorporated entity?
Excellent question. In fact, the answer to that is in my next book. Because there is a town called Greenhorn, and it has a population in the wintertime of 1, and in the summertime it fluctuates. It is an incorporated community. There is a mayor. There is a form of taxation by all the people that live there. And that's part of the key for incorporation, is getting to pay taxes to your community. And it is the smallest incorporated community in Oregon, and plug for my next book, it's also the highest in elevation. It's 6,487 feet high. Lakeview's number 2.
All right, why don't we go ahead and take a 10-minute break, come back.
While the last couple people take their seats, what we're going to show you the second half here is exactly how the books are written. And what we do, every photograph in the book is a picture of something that stands today. It's still there. I think it's important that I take people to see what's there. And if you don't buy the book, you can still see and make your mind have a major role in what was that community like. In the book, the Ghost Town books, we always let you know the area of the state, the county, what kind of car you need to have to access it. Seriously, what kind of road you're going to be facing, gravel, pavement, chuck holes or whatever. Directions to the 10th of a mile, how to find it. Okay, we think that's really important. In the 3 books, well, there's volume 1, 2, 3, 95% are family car friendly. You don't have to lean into that mic, you can just stand on it. Oh, okay, thank you. That'll make it easier for me too. The last book, the compendium, you're on your own. 4-wheel drive, look out. I mean, I went on one road looking for Bohemia City. 1 mile an hour was too fast. My wife would not go with me because she saw the road. My buddy got out and walked, and I still couldn't find the doggone ghost town. But anyway, that's how bad some of the roads are in the compendium book. So with that, let's take a tour alphabetically, and we'll get as far as we can. We chose the alphabet. We did 160 ghost towns at one time and laid them out. And we were trying to figure out what's the best way to put these together. Well, my Roads Less Traveled books are by region. So we wanted to do something differently. And what we discovered, there were 3 Z ghost towns: Xena, Zumwalt, and Zion. We then equally distributed the 150 of them. We eliminated 10 that were more difficult to get to. And we have 3 books of A to Z, and there is an A and a Z in every one of the 3 books. The 150 that we've included, I rank, and I also put in the accepted definition ranking. So if we go to Val Setz, for example, it will be an A3, and in my definition, it's a 5. Significantly, historically significant location, but is not a ghost town by my definition. So with that, let's take an alphabetic tour around the state, starting with Ajax. If you've been to Condon, you've been 20 miles away. Hard to imagine 32 families living here. It is a classification 1. Now remember, classification 1, one of the empty buildings has to be a schoolhouse, a church, general store, or a post office. And you can read the history here. Schoolhouse goes back to 1900. Here's what you'll see in the community of Ajax today, and that is it. Look at the ground. Think about how you would make a living here in Ajax. And notice, oops, get this back on. Typically 50 to 100 feet away from the buildings. Andrews. Andrews is southeast Oregon, Harney County. It's on gravel road, but it's good gravel. used to be called Wild Horse because of all the wild horses in the area. In fact, if you go to the Kiger Gorge, you can see some of the ponies that are left over from the 1600s and the Spanish conquistadors' horses that are running wild. I'm afraid of horses. I don't like them, but these are beautiful animals. And if I model for you here, there's a part of the horse leg shank. Anyway, the name of that, there are 3 stripes on the original Spanish ponies, and you can see those with binoculars if you get to see these horses at the Kiger Gorge viewing area. When you go, creep up to the edge. They know you're there. You can see them. They know you are there. So if you make noise, they're gone. They're gone. So, Andrews. Borax mining. Sorry. Remember the old TV show 20 Mule Team Borax, the old Ranger? Borax was mined here for years. And parts of the old borax works are still visible, and you can hike around to see them near the community of Andrews. Also suggest if you go, take your swimming suit. I don't know how many hot springs there are in our state. In fact, that's kind of one of the things I'm working on for my next book, the Trivia of Oregon. But there is it's a shelter for 2 families, big enough to sit in, water that's 103 degrees. It's built on the side of a hill, so the water cleanses itself every hour. It's incredible. And if you go to Andrews today, here's the old schoolhouse. You can't see the fellow's trailer. He has a trailer. That's the only building in town that's lived in, so it can't be a true 1. It's a 2. Notice the rock construction. And I say that because, notice the rock, not because of this is the water tower, but because of this, notice the rock. They used what they had. There weren't too many trees. So they used what they had to build the facility. This is the old store. Bunkum. This, teach you some Latin here today. You've heard the term, that's a lot of bunk. That comes from Latin, which means there might be and there might not be. There might be gold and there might not be. Well, in Bunkum, there was. Now, this is also one of the sordid parts of our history, darn it. It was Chinese Americans that found the first gold in Bunkum. And Bunkum is about 12 miles out of Jacksonville, 14 miles out of Jacksonville. And they did a pretty good job of keeping silent, not letting anybody know, but 1860s, a lot of people coming through. White miners discovered the successes here, promptly shot all 5 of the Chinese miners. This was on a Saturday. On Sunday, they went to court. They were found innocent. They were back mining again on the original claim of the Chinese Americans on Monday. The Chinese Americans were considered chattel, and they were not prosecuted for murder. Hard to imagine, again, 1,000 people living here, because there are 3 buildings that stand today. My wife is standing in the road taking these shots. The old post office, the building next door here, the store, and here is the bunkhouse. My wife literally turned around to take that picture. It's a meeting of 3 roads here and standing in the intersection of the 3 roads. We don't think about Burns Junction as being a ghost town, but it qualifies, and it's one of our newer ghost towns. I remember as a young man going to Burns Junction for gas and an ice cream. In fact, even before I could drive. There was an RV park here at one time. You can see the remainders of that RV park. The building still stands, the gas pumps are still there. I love the sign, closed come back tomorrow. I'm going to show you a picture of that here in a second. But here's the store and the post office, so it qualifies as a true one. Notice the gas pumps, $1.58 is how they read. Close, come back tomorrow. And here's what's left of the RV park. You can see the lanes. Look how big that was. How many people must have stayed there to keep that place afloat? Camp Gap is CCC. Hard to imagine 200 men taming horses and raising cattle here during the Depression to make a living. You have to hike in. It's a short 50-yard hike from the highway, Highway 20 or 26, can't remember which number, on the way to Burns. Goes back a long time, but what you're going to see are the buildings that remain from the CCC camp that was there in the 20s and 30s. Notice the construction again. You build things out of what you can find in the area. So here's the rock house, goes back to 34. Water towers were critical. That's why I showed the one back in Andrews. All right. Our friend Julie lives real close to Chico. Julie's another author. And Chico's up north of Enterprise. It is a true one ghost town. Close to the Idaho border, right 30 miles. Washington border, 60 miles from the Idaho in the corner. This area goes back to the 1850s. We don't think about this. This was not a gold area. Pioneers actually went in. It is beautiful country. Winters were a little more mild in the 1850s and 60s than they are today. So it brought a lot of people in, and they all left starting in the 1900s when the winters became more harsh. Hard to imagine a store and a blacksmith shop, but if you go there today, here's the old schoolhouse. And again, look at the area around. I just think that's just, in the summertime, it's gorgeous. The chicken coop. Oh my gosh, yes. Yeah, they didn't mess around, did they? And notice this house and see if you giggle when you see it. People come a couple months a year and they have to have their television. Cross Hollows. Now, remember I talked about Shaniko? And Shaniko, to me, is not a true ghost town. Cross Hollows is a 4. It has empty buildings, but one of them is not the church, not the post office, not the school or the general store. So it's a ghost town. Cross Hollows used to be Shaniko. The railroad bypassed Cross Hollows. It went the 1.5 to 2 miles north. I think it's north. People moved their homes or abandoned them to go to the new community of Shaniko. If you have been from Shaniko to Antelope, you have bypassed that community, did not know it was there. So, hard to imagine again, blacksmith shop, hotel, saloon in this community. A pile of rubble back here. And I think I have the second shot. I do. Okay. Small house. You can throw a rock from a place you can park your car to hit that, but you won't see it from the road. If you haven't a definition in your head of Donnybrook, that's how this town was named. Scottish really had one, and my sources that I was reading say the Donnybrook lasted 3 to 4 hours. Now, I'm not a fighter, but most fights I've seen, minute, not very long, Anyway, gosh, you get the idea. 10 miles from Ashwood, which is near Madras. It is on gravel road. Remember Donnybrook because we're going to take you to Horse Heaven in a moment. Used to be called Axe Handle. Fires were not friendly to this community at all. When you get to Donnybrook, there's a fence around. And I want to show this to you. The fence is not around the schoolhouse, it's around the buggy. They don't want people taking that. You can't take the schoolhouse, so you can walk inside the building. There is one trailer house that's still there, so it's not a true one. Yeah. And I think it's a summer worker is my guess. Look at the area around. Imagine the lifestyle. Anyway. Flora is my favorite ghost town in the state of Oregon. It is up near the Washington and Idaho border. It's almost a one. There are 2 families that are there, but there's about 21 empty buildings. Incredible. And if you get the chance, you want to drive from Flora down to the next town below. It is the beautiful view of the Snake River, all the way, about 12 miles all the way down. And if I can think of the name, I'll tell you. Nope, doggone it. It'll come back to me. Anyhow, Flora is the only wooden bank that I know of in the state of Oregon. Banks were made of concrete so they wouldn't burn. I even mislabeled this, my first book, because I thought it was the bank, and it wasn't until I got to go in it in 2014 where I saw the vault that I believed it was truly the bank. And so if we go to Flora, typical of what you'll see, that is the bank. Isn't that amazing? And the banker lived upstairs, but it's wooden. Livery stable. And again, look at the area. Beautiful in the summer. Beautiful, lush, green, cooler temperatures up there. It's just awesome. There's probably 15 of these guys. Notice the tape here. They don't want you going in there. Probably not the safest thing to do anyway. I didn't have a picture of the schoolhouse. The schoolhouse is 3 stories. That's how big that town was. There's 2 families today. Golden. If you've watched Gunsmoke, you've seen this on TV. 5 years of episodes were filmed here on location, 4 miles off of I-5 down by Wolf Creek. In fact, if you've been to Wolf Creek, you have been 3 miles away and didn't know it. It's now a state park. 7 buildings still stand. There is the general store. The shelves are still there. They've all been looted. You can go inside these buildings, by the way, in the summer. That is the church. The man that founded the community, built this church, went down to the creek, which is a quarter mile, if that far away. Notice gold in the creek. All of a sudden it became a gold rush. He was a strict, my mind's gone. Would not allow anyway, cussing, dancing, drinking, smoking, gambling, carousing, or working on Sundays. So all the money went to Wolf Creek on Saturday night. And the miners had to come back on Sunday to go to church, and then they went back to Wolf Creek to carouse some more till they came back on Monday to go back and work in the gold fields. Outbuilding, and this is the cemetery. I always have to tell the story, and I'm cognizant of time, and I apologize. We're not going to get to much further. It's phony. It's a TV prop. It goes back to the 50s. The story 6 feet under is true. Your body has to be that deep in one of these former caskets, or the smell would come up. One, it would bother the person walking by, but it would be an invitation for animals to dig you up. There's too many rocks here to have a cemetery. Most cemeteries are always a mile or so away from the community for the same reason. I wrote AAA and told them this, and they didn't believe me back in 2004. They wrote a retraction in 2015 but didn't credit me, so I'm mad at them to this day. Do I have literally 2 minutes and that's it? About, oh gosh, super. I promise I won't take that long. Homesteads are on the Snake River. It is the most eastern ghost town in the state of Oregon. Now I have to pause when I say that because I do not know east and west, north and south. I know left and right. My wife keeps telling me, Steve, turn north, and I freeze. I have to, in my head, put myself in front of a map, figure out where I'm going, and by the time I figured out the right way, I passed the exit, right? So in my books, I put down, go north, turn right. One of the things I taught, I taught education classes when I was a professor, and there are two hemispheres to the brain. And I am left-brained, which means I am left-right. My wife is right-brained, which means north-south. And I didn't realize there was a correlation between brain physiology and the hemisphericity of the brain until we started doing these books. So I try to cross the corpus callosum and tell you both. Anyway, Homestead was a farming community, a lumber community, and a mineral. Most of it's underwater today when the dam went in. But it goes back to 1900. I want to show you the old schoolhouse and give you an idea how big the community was. It's a little bit, it's gravel, but it's easy gravel. That is all explained in the book. One of the last residences there. It's a true one because it does have one of the buildings is a schoolhouse. The fence is there, but gosh, there's a driveway and you can see where cars have been parking. So. Talked about horse heaven, and I've been doing a lot of teasing and joking, but this is one place I don't joke. There was mercury mining here as late as the 50s. Do not touch the water. It is contaminated. There is a mountain of debris from the open pit mining where they both took gold and silver and the mercury. And so I really stress in the book too, don't even wash your hands in the creek. It's pretty nasty to this day, but it's an incredible ghost town. Oops, here's the clicker. Goes back to the 1800s, my gosh. Closed in 1958. So here's what you'll see today. This is the stamp mill, and this is where they crushed the ore. This was open pit mining, deep pit mining. So they went into the mine and brought out stuff. They crack it open, pour mercury on it, one to extract the gold. But there's mountains. This whole mountain back here is debris from the mine. It's huge, unbelievable. This is what's left of the general store, and I always point out recreational miners still mess around there. Again, the tailings often are valuable sources for open pan or for gold panning because the big chunks is what they were looking for, not the small flakes. Part of the mercury mining process that's still there. And you can get an idea again from the rocks and the debris from the open pit mine, from the mine, and in front as well. Lone Pine Village is one of those that's been enveloped by the town of the Dalles. If you've been to the Dalles, you have passed this, and every time you've passed it, you can anyway, you'll kick yourself for not seeing it. And it was a Shaker church that settled this for the Native Americans. Now we think of Shakers, I think of, 'tis a gift to be simple, 'tis a gift to be free. It's the Shakers back east. No, this is the Shakers where the Spirit of God would ascend upon you and you would start shaking. So the minister would give his wife the cue, and she would start shaking. And the Native Americans would be in rapture watching this go on, see? Well, the Native Americans would migrate every quarter. So they would play the game. They figured this out pretty quickly. They play the game, get the clothes, get the needed, listen, get religion, and then they'd move on and forget everything and come back again the next quarter when they came back to catch the salmon. The buildings still stand behind the Shiloh Inn right off of the freeway in the Dalles. And if you go there, you can walk around. There's the dam. Freeway is a quarter mile behind me. 7 buildings. Let's see, this is the outhouse. Amazing that it's survived more than other things. One of the outbuildings. Tough way to make a living too. Boy, look at that rock. Oh, we did Malheur City already, sorry. Maxville. This is, I have to confess, this is one of those ghost towns. The book is December 2016. It's no longer there. For good reason. Gwen Trice, who is a friend of mine who was in charge of education, or on the education department at Eastern Oregon University, her great-grandfather was one of the workers here. Maxville was, what do you call it? A place where they brought African Americans into the community to work alongside white mill workers back in the 30s and 20s. The irony of this, half the town was white, half the town was black, and there was a line in the middle, and there was a schoolhouse here and a schoolhouse here and a store here. But when the 8 o'clock whistle, 7 o'clock whistle blew, everybody sat in the crummy the same way, or on the, the way to get to the timber. Ball teams were separate. There's one building that stood. I'll show you a picture of that. It was taken apart, board by board, nail by nail, and moved into Wallowa, so more people could see it and learn about the experiment of the 20s and 30s. And had you gone to Maxville 6 months ago, this is what you would have seen in its original location. That is now looking exactly the same way in the community of Wallowa today. There is one house that's still there. That's this one. It's about half mile away from the old store. Milliken is a newer ghost town, and if you looked, it probably caught your eye down here was the murder. It was a one-man town. It was in Ripley's, believe it or not, a couple times during the 20s and 30s. Milliken was never enough to support 2 people, but it took 2 people to work it. Well, anyway, the man that owned the town hired this fellow who promptly killed him for the money in the till one day. And that was back in the 80s, and the town has never recovered from that. And if you drive through today, it's a true one ghost town, and the buildings still stand. And you'll see, here's the old store. The service station is to the left, and here's an outbuilding that you'll see right behind the store. This is one I hadn't heard of until I traveled to it. This is on the California border, down south of Lakeview, about 20 miles. It's in my top 10. I love this ghost town. There's over a dozen old buildings. One of those buildings is a grist mill from 1879. This is the main street of town. Gives you an idea of the buildings that are lining, I think it's Highway 97 en route to California. Now remember I told you it was right on the line, on the California-Oregon line. That's significant. This is the grist mill. You can't get any closer than this, darn it. But I think that's so cool. But I show you this picture because the California border runs through the man's back porch. Now that is significant because he could buy liquor more cheaply from California and not pay the tax on it that he had to. But once it came through his back door and into Oregon, he could sell it at Oregon prices. crazy. There's a couple other places. Place on the border south of the one right across from Denial. Here again, same thing. Oh, the White Horse. Anyway, half the casino is in Nevada, so you could legally gamble. The other half was the restaurant, so you didn't have to pay tax and could get a room for no taxes. Anyway, this is the old store. It is a secondhand store, and as cluttered as it is on the outside, it's worse on the inside. And oh my gosh, but it's still kind of cool. And this, just down from the Grange and right across the street from the tavern that's on the border of California. Ordnance. One of the newer ghost towns as well. Up at Umatilla Army Depot closed, was it 2013, I believe. Ordnance is not far. It's an easy off and an easy on. There's an off ramp and on ramp for Ordnance. That's, anyway. Goes back to 41. Store, water tower foundations are still standing. There's the store. It reminds me of the movie On the Beach. The starkness, the concrete, the no life at all. And here's all kinds of foundations that still stand in what used to be the community of Ordnance. There's some more. Paradise. Close to Flora again, this up to the Idaho-Washington border. Cattle. Goes again. Remember we talked about the weather change, and it was nicer. Now it's gotten worse. Lots of people lived here. Two-wheel drive, easy to get to. School, cemetery, dance hall. Watch this. The green. This is in June. Beautiful area. This is the dance hall. This is not the church. Other than they built the porch because they started holding services there because it was the building big enough to hold that many people. The other buildings weren't big enough. So it gives you an idea how big Paradise was 100+ years ago. See the pines? Those are small ones. Hard to imagine the size of the pines when they did a lot of logging on the east side. Now remember the diamond? Okay. There's a matching one on the other side. Diamond construction is more difficult to build into a building. Even today, it takes different size studs, and you have to do this and that, and the miters and whatnot. You can tell when a community thought highly of its school when they put in windows such as this. They really cared for their kids, and it was a true showcase for the community. This one also has his and her outhouses. Second sign. I just think that's so cool. Not far from Paradise is Promise. And it goes back to the 1890s again. It was a farming community, close to Wallowa, two-wheel drive, gravel road. Look what was there, or look what's there today, if you've ever heard of Promise. That is the post office. Look how tiny that thing is. Goes back to 96. There's probably 7 buildings that still stand in the area. Love that old house. Yeah. For their attic, the diamond. Gives you an idea how old that building is. All right, Richmond. Pocatello, Idaho, Fort Hall was a real critical point for pioneers. This was what I call the decision-making time. They had to make a decision. Do they take the California Trail south and west and then come up Applegate's Trail, which is now I-5, or do they continue across the Oregon Trail to the Dalles? Had to make a decision here. A lot of Southerners went south. Anybody here from Dallas? Ah, okay, you probably know the story. The Applegate Trail had slaves. The Southerners had slaves. There were slaves in Dallas. Dallas had a KKK. Baker, oh gosh, the books are full of them. It's amazing. Well, anyway, there was a hanging tree in Dallas, and I knew this because growing up in Independence, they needed to add to the courthouse. And the only way they could do an addition to the courthouse is to cut down the hanging tree. And that debate lasted for over a year, if you remember the debate back in the 60s, to cut that tree down or not, because they might need it again. Oh no, I'm dead serious. Well, it was used frequently to tar and feather, but also black African Americans were hung on that tree. The leader of the KKK, the Grand Poobah, is known as the Grand Dragon. What's your school mascot in Dallas? Dragon. Yeah, yeah. Now, people in Polk County disavow that, but if you go about 80 miles south and you go to the town of Monroe, on the Applegate Trail, settled by Southerners who also had slaves, guess what their mascot is too? It's the dragon, after the KKK. Long story to get back to Richmond, but Oregon's history is what it is. Can't change it. We can learn from it. But that's some of the more sordid stuff that's happened in our state, and it's eye-opener. But here in Richmond, it's a true ghost town. 2 miles gravel road. It's a good gravel off the main highway. Look what still stands. Well, kinda. You'll see a picture in a second. Goes back to 1899, and this building was still working in 1952 that we'll see a picture of here. Look what it had. IOOF Blacksmith Saloon. 200 people lived here, and here is what's left of the store. This picture's 3 years old, so it's worse, according to a friend that was there last summer. I just think that's so cool. This is the church. Look behind. There's the schoolhouse. We were blessed. Again, we were taking pictures, and the person said, "What are you doing?" So we told them, and they said, "Come on and let's take you down." 5th generations of the people that lived there originally still reside in Richmond today, and they're the ones that took us on the tour through the church and the schoolhouse. I just think that's so cool. And this is the road my wife's standing on taking this picture. I was throwing rocks again for her so she could go. Out of Cottage Grove, people don't know much about Royal. 2-wheel drive, it's all pavement to get there. Cemetery, school, church. It used to be named Repliger after the first postmaster. Silk Creek, when the second postmaster came in and changed the name. And Hazelton after the third postmaster that came in. The 4th postmaster changed it to Royal. But here's what you'll see in the community of Royal. This is the schoolhouse. And I hate when people do that kind of stuff because it's kind of a junk pile, but it's unfortunate, but it is what it is. My wife turned around quickly to take this picture. It's all close. We got to go on a tour of this. The community has reconstructed this back to its original look with the original Bible that's still in the pulpit on the dais in the sanctuary. And here's the cemetery. And it's called Silk Creek. And evidently the postmaster's wife was an excellent seamstress with fancy fabrics. And I don't know much about sewing, but I guess sewing silk is not easy. And she was very good at it. I think we can finish this before the allotted time. Sparta. 5,000 miners lived here. There's 2 buildings that survive. There's a few new buildings, some mobile homes that come in for people who are still working the mines up there. Hard rock mining was the way they made their living. Again, some did the tailings, so didn't get dirty or as dirty. Gold goes back to 1863. There is a Boot Hill, but doggone it, it's on private property. Here's what you'll see in Sparta. Now, this is a sad story I'm going to tell you. This goes back to 1878. So you can imagine the number of miners that went in here, exchanging gold for goods. They want to open this up for tourists in the summer. But they have to build it to not only code, but historic code. So you have to make it earthquake proof, you do all that kind of stuff, and do it so that everything's hidden and original. It's cost prohibitive because the weather's so bad, this will only be open 3 to 6 months of the year, and the people can't afford to do it. Darn. I get the codes, but they ought to make them exceptions. Anyway, so notice the brick here. We're going to travel 1 mile from this store. If I hit the right button, there we go. This will work better. Look at the construction. Fires didn't affect the store or this house. Most miners wanted to throw a house up as quickly as they could, so they used wood. It took a long time to build a stone house. They wanted to get to that gold, or they only did it part-time. You know, they were mining, and then do a little bit of work on their home. All right, about 3 more and we'll be done here. Susanville, one of my top 5 ghost towns in the state of Oregon. It's either a 4-wheel drive or a 2-mile hike up. And I mentioned the hike up because was it 1865, there was a fellow hiking around and he saw this little creek. He was hiking up and he was running to the creek. He saw gold glittering in the water and he tripped on this rock. Picked himself up. It's bigger than my fist. It is the largest gold nugget found in the state of Oregon to date. It's on display in the Baker City U.S. Bank if you go there next week to see. But it's from the community of Susanville. And they were still mining in the 1850s there. So here's Susanville today. Remember the stamp mill? This is what's left of it. This is right on the water. You can jump across the creek in summertime. It's not much water, but all the gold that came out of there is unbelievable. Kind of like the Canyon City to John Day. That little creek you can jump across too, and they estimate $10 million worth of gold came from it. Hard rock mining, after all the loose played out, that's typical. Those are tough guys. One of the houses, it's called a string town. All the houses line the main street. Nothing goes out. Everybody lived on this road. And it's hard to imagine 5,000 side by side up and down the road. And you'll kind of picture that in your head when you get there. Okay, W and then Z. Whitney. Again, kind of like the community of Austin, made their money providing things for the miners, especially the hard rock miners, wood products, the supplies. The mill burned down, the town was abandoned, but about 6 buildings still stand. There is an unofficial mayor that lives in the general store during the summers to protect the town, and we befriended him and we got to go through the buildings, but this is where he stays in the summer. Bless his heart. That's the old general store. And here's some other buildings that you'll see if you go there today. Again, look at that ground. One more. A to Z, Zumwalt. It's a true one. 2-wheel drive gravel. Zumwalt is unique. This one is a 26-mile drive through some of the neatest old buildings, barns that you can ever imagine. Some of the roads are 4-wheel drive. Many of them are 2-wheel drive gravel. So just be warned ahead of time. Goes back to 1903, closed in 20, dismantled. The area now is 330,000 acres of grassland, nature land. And if you watch enough OPB, you'll see the Zumwalt Prairie talked about quite a bit. And if you go there today, typical of the things you're going to see. The old farmhouse. See the 40 in the corner? Yeah. And all over everywhere are those guys. We're about to that point for questions, but A to Z gives you, hopefully it whets your appetite for ghost towning in the state of Oregon, because it's my passion. This is my favorite part of all my books. So thank you. Eunice, thank you for having me.
Hi, Steve. Eunice here. You brought back some memories. I grew up in Klamath Falls, and our local newspaper used to have columns by people who would write in their news. We had, on a regular basis, the New Pine Creek News.
You have to go to Pine Creek sometimes. I won't venture far from this guy.
Karen again. I know that some of these houses like this are on private property. And so we had in the family one that was down in Broadbent. Are you familiar with Broadbent?
It's in Southwest Book and in one of the ghost town books.
Okay. And it had to be taken down because people were going in there and we could be sued. Type of thing. Okay.
The owners are sued, not the person that breaks in. It's backwards. It's wrong. Oh, yes, sir.
I have a friend who grew up in Cornucopia. I have a friend whose father was a mining engineer. She grew up in Cornucopia. Is there anything there?
Yes, but go soon because it's dying slowly. My wife and I were first there, we were married 40 years ago. And we started doing this. I wish I'd written books then, but we went to Cornucopia back in 78, 79. There were probably 24 buildings that were standing. We went again in 2003 and there may have been 7. We went again in 2014 to take some more pictures. There's like 2 that are remaining. And one of them is the old bunkhouse. But the store is gone, the saloon is gone. It's just the weather is so harsh and there's so much snow. Those old buildings, again, single wall constructed, just can't take it. And so if we want to go to Cornucopia, go soon. And Cornucopia is the deepest mine in the state of Oregon, or was the deepest.
This is Peter.
Oh, there he is, okay.
If you're interested in some old stone building ruins from the early 1800s, you'll have to go a little further afield. You cannot get there with four-wheel drive. It's in Western Tasmania. And it's historically interesting because these were the convicts sent out from Britain, and they were the most incorrigible convicts, so they had to be taken to the most isolated part of the world, which at that time was Western Tasmania. And the convicts were put to work building boats. And 3 of the convicts stole one of the boats and sailed all the way to South America, where they were captured and, would you believe, sent back to Western Tasmania. But some of the old stone buildings are really fascinating.
I can imagine. I believe Australia was settled the same way, wasn't it, with convicts?
All except Adelaide, all the state capitals except Adelaide was settled by convicts.
Hi, this is Dennis. My grandmother was born in Promise, and her name is Promise, and she lived to be 104.
Wow.
But she was the first white kid born in Promise, is why they called her that.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm Jane. I just wanted to mention, you didn't talk about Valsets, but when I first came to Oregon, I used to give Tupperware parties. And I lived here in Salem and would drive, it's a long way. I'd go to Dallas and to Falls City and up the mountains, and the timber trucks would be coming down. And my mother-in-law used to worry about me so much because I was pregnant some of the time, and and have to go around up there. But it was very interesting, and I did meet work with the principal, the wife of the principal of the high school, and met a lot of people there, and it was quite thriving at the time. So now it's gone, and I just wanted to mention that it was an interesting time.
I think I shared with you, I grew up in Independence. Well, we used to play baseball against the boys in Valsets. And the general store was owned by the Boise Cascade Company, but ran by Jimmy Frank, whose boys were friends of mine growing up. In the general store was a bowling alley where you set your pins up by hand, and I remember doing that. And we loved going up to play ball there because we got to go in the store and bowl the way they did years and years ago. My first man job was working Green Chain Boise Cascade, where Jim Travis, who went to Valsets, I stayed in Independence at the local mill. It brought back lots of memories too, when every time anybody says Valsets. Oops.
Hi.
Yes, sir.
Norman again. I'm just curious. I've done a lot of ghost town hunting, and there are times where, I'll find one way out in the middle of nowhere. And I'm just curious, what criteria do you kind of go through in your mind before you decide that you feel comfortable going in a building, or do you just never go in them? I mean, sometimes there's places way out in the middle of nowhere where it doesn't matter if there's nobody there, they're not going to know, but that doesn't necessarily make it right to go in. So I'm just curious what your decision-making process is with that.
I guess I can share that with you all. I have strict rules in the book that I hope people follow. And one is, it's not stated, so I guess I can legally do this. I will walk into a building if it's not fenced, if I feel it's structurally sound, but I will not take anything. That's sacred to me, and that's one of the things I really stress in my books too. Leave it there. There's a reason for it to be there. I'm also very careful. I'll have my wife throw the rocks in before but I'm very cautious about, especially Eastern Oregon. Those snakes hide in there for a reason. So I share that with you as well. But I hope I live up to what I say I ask people to do from my books about not going into places. And if it's fenced, I honestly will not cross the fence. Yeah, that's what someone mentioned that earlier too, and that's for sure.
Okay, Steve, I think we're out of time. I've enjoyed this, and I'm sure everybody else has too. Thank you so much.